Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Course of the Discourse podcast. I'm your host, Omar El Faris, and today I'm delighted to discuss Zionism and anti-Zionism in the Jewish diaspora with my friend Sami Gold. Sami is an American Jewish student and a writer with contributions to liberal currents. He has gone through a quite interesting journey from being raised in a liberal Zionist environment where Zionism as a political ideology was tied to his Jewish identity, to challenging this deep-seated notion. It's a pleasure to have you here today, Sami.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on here. I mean, what can I say? You're a great friend, and I just want to support your mission.
So to begin this dialogue, how could you or could you share with us your political journey over the years? How would you characterize the impact of Zionism on the Jewish identity in your own experience, and how do you relate to the ideology today?
I mean, I would say that I grew up in a community that was definitely observantly Jewish. We wouldn't, I mean, at least in my home, we never kept the Sabbath in terms of not using electronics, etc., not, only walking places. But we try to go to synagogue as much as we could. We kept kosher inside the home. I went to Jewish school from pre-K all the way up to college, but the focus was more so on a Judaism that believed in the importance of the state of Israel. I went to a Zionist summer camp for 5 to 6 years. Um, yeah, I went at my middle school and high school that I went to at um at every assembly there would be the not just the US national anthem played, but also the Israeli anthem. I've been to Israel twice. I and it's just sort of always been a lodestar in my families and in my milieus, politics. The idea that no matter where you land, left or right, you always believe, at least in the basics, of that there should be a Jewish state in the land that is currently controlled by Israel. And I would say the big moment that changed my beliefs happened when I was preparing to be a counselor at one of these summer camps. And previously, I had been starting to get more disillusioned with Israel. I mean, I I was witness, not personally, but to the coverage of the Great March of Return and the brutal attack on it in 2018, and in 2021, the uh imbroglio between Hamas and Israel, the one before the current one. And I had started to become more questionable of Israel. I still would have called myself a liberal Zionist, but I was becoming like I would question whether Israel was always just attacking because Hamas was using human shields, or the idea that Israel is the most moral army on earth. It's a preposterous claim. Uh, so at this summer camp, as I was saying, we were preparing to be counselors, and one of the days, because it was a Zionist summer camp, was dedicated to Israel Palestine. How you could teach it to the kids, how you could talk about it, and also in a conversation with your other fellow counselors. Now, it wasn't only American Jews at this summer camp. It was also people who had just come out of the IDF, just finished their mandated service in the IDF, spending a year in America. And there were a few of those, and we were partnered with each other, and we had to sort of just give our opinions, air them out however we desired them to. And I gave very lukewarm, why can't we all be friends style belief. I said something akin to I think Hamas is bad and Israel's a right to exist, yada yada yada. But I think it's harmful what they're doing to the people in Gaza and the West Bank. And I think that they should try to treat them better. Like a very broad
Mm.
statement. And this guy's reaction, he was, very secular, to the best of my remembrance. I don't know if he was on, I don't know if he identified as being on the Israeli left, but I don't believe he was a fan of Netanyahu. Just said, I wish they would all leave or go away. I don't want to see another Palestinian in my life. I don't want them anywhere here. And hearing such an openly genocidal line come out of someone who was supposed to be, just sort of on the aesthetic level, more progressive or at least more accommodating, that just sort of, I just blew any preconception I had of Israel and what Zionism has done to Jews. This idea that it's approved all across the Israeli political spectrum, left to right, that Palestinians are subhuman. And I learned more and more. I can get into that later if you want, but I think by the time 2023 came along, I would have called myself an anti-Zionist, and the Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people has only furthered my belief in that assertion.
Some Jews will say, okay, I need to have a homeland if something is going to happen to me here in the diaspora. Some Jews in Sweden I know here, usually they say, I still need to be a Zionist because if the anti-Semitism would rise here, I would just like move to Israel, even if I don't have connections there. I think this kind of stance is even broad among many Jews, even in America, among American Jews who don't relate much to Israel and their actions and probably never have been there. But I mean, I'm of course talking from my perspective and from those experiences, and you probably am somewhat familiar with this kind of argument that Jews need always to have a second home or somewhere to go if there would be a rise of anti-Semitism. I mean, like, this is just one kind of interesting thing also to see that there is some form of brainwash to establish some form of norms, what is acceptable to do and think and what is not. What you are allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say within this community. I think the summer camps, in one way or other, and to some extent, schools also provide important education in the Jewish culture and Judaism as a religion and stuff like that. But it also has been pretty much infiltrated into becoming institutions that do a lot of propaganda for Israel. And many people get directly their views of Israel and Palestine and Palestinians. Many have probably never talked to Palestinians, and all the views of Palestinians are through the lens of demonization and dehumanization of Palestinians and depiction of Palestinians as inherently violent terrorists and all kinds of negative views.
I mean, of course. I mean, just to start with one of the things he said, which is about the sort of indoctrination of American Jews into having Israel become like the nexus of their Judaism. That's systemic, and it's been since the 60s. You can argue earlier, but I think 67 and the victory of Israel in the Six-Day War really codified that. I mean, many people in my community don't view Israel as a state. They don't view it as a state with a government, with a regime, uh, create a social construct, right? Like all other nations are. They view it as a sort of existential necessity that not only stops the possibility of another Holocaust, of another Shoah occurring to Jewry, but also as just essentially your safe space. They don't. This is one of the inherent contradictions of liberal Zionism. They seek to create a Zion or sponsor a Zionism that doesn't exist and frankly never has existed. But you hear it again and again, the sort of rote obsessions over the such word creations as a Jewish and democratic state. The obsession over the word democratic is very important because if you told American Jews, do you support a Jewish state that denies sovereignty to another group of people to the point of apartheid and genocide? I'm almost certain less than 3%, or hopefully less, would say yes. Because that is the fundamental reality, but we don't learn that reality. I had
Yeah,
never spoken to a Palestinian until I was 18. I had never heard of Deir Yassin or the Nakba until I was 16. And that was just through the internet. We never heard it in school, or we never heard it in these summer camps, or in family dialogues, or in the countless Israel education events I had to go to. We never hear about the Lebanon War, about the Havarah Agreement, about Lehi, the darker sides of Zionism. We view Ben Gurion and Golda Meir and Herzl as even more so than America with the founding fathers, because there is a negative historiography there that it's rising. We view them as being set in stone paragons of virtue, cross partisan. And
yeah.
however, I would say that I think it's important for us to give things labels. Zionism has for too long been able to coast on its accept as its status as the acceptable nationalism. As the
Mm.
idea of that it's a nationalism that you can't claim is nationalism. No one no one has ever treated in mainstream American society the PLO on the same level as the Haganah or Israel's army or what have you, even though they are both a form of a nationalist project because Israel is allowed to be nationalist. And I think
I
that if we
think
explicitly make people realize that Zionism is a political ideology and not just a tautology, there will be a shift.
I think just like the idea of nationalisms, like Zionism is much more treated as a legitimate form of nationalism in the US in American discourse, from at least from what I've said. I of course don't live in the United States, but I take much part of the news reporting and I see much in the social media. And when you say Palestinian nationalism, people get scared and they will directly ask you, like, do you want to kill all Jews? Do you want this or that? They directly associated with terrorism and eradication of the Jewish people. But when you say Zionism, people will make like, okay, so you're just like a normie who supports the only Jewish state in a sea of Arab states, or they will make this existentialist argument that if there is no Israel, or you can just like say if Israel treats Palestinians as equals, that would be the same as a second Holocaust. I've seen many people, Israeli propagandists as Elon Levy, like he wants Israel to control the West Bank, but also not give Palestinians citizenship, but also calls people anti-Semitic for calling it an apartheid state. I just like think this is interesting, but I mean like just like in comparison, PLO with let's just compare it with, let's say its equivalent would probably Haganah during the 30s,
The
40s.
Haganah, the
Um,
Haganah, or the Irgun, I would say.
I think like however one would try to frame it, there is still an asymmetric point of view of how you treat one party and the other. So you have the Palestinian party, which is much weaker than the Israeli party. Palestinians do not have any independent state. They do not, but their agency is treated above those of Israel's agency. Now you see, Israel is allowed to kill as many civilians as it wants. It is allowed to decimate the entire Gaza Strip, and still it will get unconditional American support, and it will not get even questioned for its actions. Like, okay, maybe some caveats if Israel could do something a bit milder. Um, but I think when it comes to Israel's actions as a whole, like it has been much more tolerated. It has been put to a different standard. People when they try to make this argument about what is this anti-Semitism definition called again? Um,
The Are you talking about the
IHRA.
IHRA?
Yeah. IHRA definition. People say it's anti-Semitic to put Israel to other standards, than to other states. If one would make this argument, I think you can make this argument and say, okay, but why is Israel always put to lower standards? You don't need to like Hamas to see that Israel is always treated as more of the victim than Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas are treated as the biggest offenders, despite Israel having killed tens of times more more civilians, committed all of the crimes one can attribute to Hamas, and all allegations against Hamas. True or not, that's another. But I mean, the allegations about all kinds of war crimes, deliberate targeting of you can find all of these allegations against Hamas, against Israel, and Israel has done it in a much higher scale. And another thing that also makes the thing worse is that Israel is the actual dominant party. That when many proponents for Israel say that the chant "from the river to the sea" is anti-Semitic, to call for Palestinian rule between this entire area, that would be anti-Semitic. Even if one would say equal rights between Jews and the Palestinians, that would be anti-Semitic. But as we see things right now, there is one state, one military that controls the land from the river to the sea, and is currently committing a genocide and has been committing also ethnic cleansing, not only in the Gaza Strip. We've seen hundreds of thousands being displaced from their homes, and the homes have been now destroyed. They cannot return to those homes. And then you also have a similar trend in the West Bank, and it has been going on even longer than that. We have seen, for instance, now people are talking about the Sheikh Jarrah incidents have been much of the topic before October 7, and we have seen Israel has been displacing Palestinian villagers in the West Banks from of the more sparsely populated areas into more populated areas, and they want to take more of the lands and settle them with the Jewish settlers. So I think people are much more mad about a slogan than the factual reality that there is actually, from the river to the sea, Israel is controlling the land, and people are okay with it. They're consenting to it. I think much of the focus has been on the discourse more than on what's actually happening. On people think words matter more than people actually suffering.
I mean, there's definitely a semantic difference in the way we talk about Israel and the way we talk about Palestine. Just take, for example, one of some of the classic slogans of Hasbara is Israel has a right to exist. Do you support Israel's right to exist? There is no state in the world or force in the world that has the ability to deny Israel's right to exist as a state. Hamas, even if it launched all of its military capacity into Israel, could not destroy Israel's existence as a state. There would still be the government, there would still be the army, there would still be the civil society that would not go. Otherwise, meanwhile, look at Israel's just complete obliteration of Palestinian civil society, complete obliteration of Palestinian life and culture and nationhood. Nations have the right to exist as well. Peoples have the right to exist as themselves. States do not. Did Yugoslavia have a right to exist? Did the Soviet Union have a right to exist? Did the United Arab Republic have a right to exist? If so, they didn't listen to them. States come and go, but nations stay. Peoples stay. But we don't treat the Israeli people as a nation. We treat them as a linguistic, not even as linguistic, as just on a different axial plane. Just the very mention of Palestine will cause people to act that it is a negation of Israel's existence, because Palestine's existence is a negation of Israel's existence in a sense. For Israel, as its current government and as its current structure exists, fundamentally only can or fundamentally is constructed on the negation of Palestinian nationhood, on the negation of Palestinian equality. The right for Israel to exist as a Jewish state, specifically a Jewish state, can only happen if it commits to an apartheid regime against the Palestinian people. And to go on to your to your other statement about treating slogans as equivalent to war crimes. I mean, every protest movement has their aggressive, controversial slogans. That's how protest movements work. Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And in the anti-Vietnam War movement, there were dozens upon dozens of signs talking about all support to the Viet Cong and to the North Vietnamese liberation fronts. And in the civil rights movement even there were aggressive slogans. And the gay rights movement there were aggressive slogans. But we don't remember those because they're not what's important.
People have been much obsessing of the slogans like "from the river to the sea," "globalized intifada." I mean, like, I can understand some of the connotations, but like that's not the interpretations of what the protesters are actually saying when they say probably globalized intifada. They are talking about like that's usually leftists who are talking about they want the revolution, they want people to actually take actions, boycott, strike. These were also the things that were taking place during the first Intifada, for instance, which was initially very non-violent, which people don't always talk about. People will always take the worst kind of definition, or like that's their own definition of the word, which is not what those who
Most
are protesting.
offensive interpretation of a
Yeah,
slogan.
yeah, of course. So when you're actually talking about someone protesting against the actions of Israel and protesting Israel's war crimes, and saying we need to act as a whole society, we need to do more. People try to raise spirit using such slogans, "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Often when I hear such slogans, it is also related to people who want one state where Jews and Palestinians are treated as equals. But I mean, I think one interesting thing that you mentioned before is that I mean, like there is an obsession with Zionists that they want Israel to be a Jewish state. Okay, just like the idea that you want people to recognize your state as an ethno-state. I don't think you can really find a real equivalent somewhere else. I don't think Pakistan has recognized India as a Hindu state. India hasn't recognized Pakistan as a Muslim state. Or if you get this image, like people are not recognizing on the basis of ethnicity or religion anywhere else, but it is Israel that added this demand. So it's also funny because like Israeli propagandists like to say Israel is a state for all its citizens. So why are you obsessing with people to recognize that state which should not also represent its Palestinian citizens? And like there you have the Druze, you have Christians, Muslims, all kinds of people who have Israeli citizenship. Now many of them are also treated as second class citizens. But the idea that you should push for this notion that this state should be exclusively Jewish, and many people don't see the contradiction with a state founded on liberal principles that treats all its citizens as equals, as secular. I don't think you can say Israel is full-blooded theocratic state, but it is. I wouldn't say it is full-blooded either secular state. One can get into the
That
English
is
later, but
that is ultimately one of the points that drives me up the wall. The treatment of people who believe in a one-state solution like me as being the radicals, as being the exception, as being the ones on the fringe, asking for pie in the sky ideas. A pie in the sky idea is the belief that a state with around 49% of its population being one ethnicity can still call itself democratic and deny any representation to 51% of that population. That is not a normal, acceptable idea. This is what really gets my goat. It's the idea that people like me who believe in a one-state solution, who believe in a binational, and that's not just the power, and the two main nations is what we referred to in the term binational, would also include representation for Druze, for Christians, for Bedouins, etc. It's the idea that a binational secular state is a radical proposition. As the idea that if, or like the idea that a state equivalent to, say, Vatican City is somehow more of a mature idea than a state in the style of Belgium. Israel Israel cannot call itself a democracy fully if it denies 51, if I remember my numbers right, 51% of its population to have no representation in its political system. And then there's the other Tony Judt, the great British American historian, wrote an essay in 2005 where he called Israel the country that won't grow up. The idea that Israel, because Zionism was a stillborn nationalism. It didn't achieve its fulfillment in the golden age of liberal nationalism after the Treaty of Versailles. It had to have its flowering after World War II, when nationalism got a more dirty name in the West. And there is a belief that why can't we have what all of you had? It's our turn now to have it. It's a childlike state. It's a childlike raison d'etre. It's and no one recognizes that. You aren't allowed to have an ethno-state because other states kicked out certain ethnicities or gave ethnicities higher forms of citizenship than others in the past. You don't get a free pass to have to try that out.
I think I mean like my entire argument about the contradiction between liberalism and Zionism. I don't think liberal Zionism is a coherent ideology, because liberalism as an ideology is built on equality, on individual freedom. You should have the same rights as me. So if we agree on these principles, if you would have your own state on lands where I lived on the principles that you lived 2000 years, your great, I don't think the average Jew can remember like so long 2000 years. I really don't think anyone can remember which
Well,
village
no,
even.
they don't actually believe that. I mean, some do. There are religious Jews who believe in that assertion. I'm not going to deny that. But and you see this in the recent movement to call Zionism a land back movement in the style of other indigenous peoples receiving recognition in the US or Australia. Uh, it's an absurd idea that the Israelites of biblical times or of Roman times even are equivalent to modern Jews, or that we have the same sort of claimages as the Israelites did. This isn't to say that Jews are from Khazars or that a whole absurd conspiracy about Ashkenazi Jewish origin. But, if we were to follow this claim, then then the Jews don't have the main claim on a place like Jerusalem. It's the Jebusites, it's the Philistines. But no one would ever take that seriously. No one would ever say that, that a place like Syria should be, it's actually meant to be in the hands of the Assyrians. And this isn't to say that that these groups don't have rights and that Jews don't have the ability to live in the Levant, or that they didn't in between the exile and the beginning of the Jewish state. There were Jews there, and I
Mm.
believe that there is a right to immigration.
I mean,
But
like, yeah.
no very little Zionists actually believe in a land back claim. It's just a way for them to accept Zionism on progressive claims.
I think many are using this kind of biblical argument. Many people don't even believe in God, which also make this funny. But like, okay, they will use the history argument. They will say, "Look, would someone make this argument about the Romani people living in Europe? Their great ancestors lived in India before they were expelled or ruled." People say, okay, some Moroccan Muslims, their great ancestors were actually indigenous to Spain and they were expelled during the Reconquista. Should they also have the right to create a homogeneous state for their own group in this flats where I think one can't do this kind of irredentist kind of claims, and I think this is something. I mean, like, this is something very unique to Zionism, and I wouldn't even say this is solely a Jewish idea. I think it has also a lot of Christian Zionist roots in it. That by getting the Jews to move to Palestine, they would like get Jesus to return, and like this entire like biblical argument. All Jews would convert to Christianity and stuff like that. I mean, like the beginning of Zionism, you can't say it began during the British Mandate, right? Because
Yes,
because there were Jewish migration to Palestine before the British Mandate. You can make the argument that the early roots of the modern Zionism could be attributed to the first Aliyah, which was during the pogroms in Russia, and then the establishment of the World Zionist Organization in the late 1987, I think. No, 1897, I think.
27. Yes, in Basel.
Yeah, but here that facilitated a movement, but there were already both among Christian Zionists and also Jews. Many Jews based their Zionism on rather nationalist ideas than on religious ideas. But of course, religious ideas got also stronger roots on years. Anyway, but I think just like Israel as a concept, I don't think you can really reconcile it with liberalism because Israel's foundation isn't you can't really compare it with other states. Israel as a state, it is really premised on Jews having exclusive rights. I mean, you can theoretically have 51% of people in Germany with non-German background and still the country will be called Germany because the German nationality is built right now on citizenship. If you have the citizenship, you are German. Of course, there will be still large amount of people who are racist and xenophobic. But I mean, you can make this argument about. I don't think like you can have a similar. I don't think you can really reconcile these ideas because like if Israel would, for instance, like, see the states as a state of all its citizens, right? Wouldn't it apply equally on its policies towards its Palestinians? So let's say the question of law of return. The law of return today, that's exclusively for Jews. So that means basically that if you're
Exactly.
Jewish diaspora, you have the right to move to Israel and obtain citizenship. I think there are some requirements here and there, but like it will be quite easy for you to do Aliyah. But if you're Palestinian and your ancestors lived very recently, unlike the Jews who lived probably in Brooklyn or
And you
in Europe,
still own the land claims. You still have the key. You still have the land claims.
just like comparing it to proximities. So if one lived, I mean, 1,800 years ago in the land, if you have, yeah, then comparing it with someone who lived in the land 80 years ago, I think there is a huge difference. Besides that, you actually didn't live 1,800 years ago because you can't live that long. So I don't think we can really reconcile it with the principles of liberalism Because if you would apply full equality, Israel wouldn't be really Israel. It would be a state for all its citizens. Even in the context of a two-state solution, I don't think Israel. I mean, that would be much easier for Israel to justify it as a Jewish state, because then Israel would consist of.
They would essentially expel the biggest demographic threat to their Jewish nature. There would still be Arabs, there would still be, but essentially Israel would be able to secure itself. I mean, but a two-state solution is impossible because Israel doesn't want to give it up.
I think it's both ways very difficult, if I would just say from my perspective. I think the difficulties with one state solution, with a two-state solution, cannot be solved by a one-state solution. We have borders. The problem is political will rather than practical reality. We've seen more than 2 years of genocidal war in the Gaza Strip, and likewise an ever increasing both in brutality and in numbers, Israeli Jewish settler terrorist attacks against Palestinians in the West Bank. Often these are not only overlooked but also backed by the Israeli army. One also important thing to mention here in this context is that there has been a trend over the last few years among younger American Jews to be more critical than their parents, than their older generations, just in general. How do you think these dynamics impact the Jewish American relationship, both today but also in the more prospective kind of aspects in the future?
I think this goes to what I was previously going to say as well, but I think that what the Gaza genocide and the settler brutality in the West Bank since 2023 has done, has essentially, for at least Jews my age or a tad older and younger, is that it's made it's revealed that Zionism is an ideology that cannot be bifurcated into a different ideology of what you want it to be. That there is a existent form of Zionism that is actively committing harm, and that is what it means in the modern day and age. For most Jews my age, there's a belief that, and this tends to be the position of most people who identify as liberal Zionists. They treat Israel not as it actually exists, but as they want it to be, and argue from those planes. When they talk about Israel's right to exist as a democratic state and Jewish state, they don't actually are trying to talk about what Israel's facts on the ground now, when it cannot be claimed as democratic, at least for the majority of everyone in its territories. They talk about the Israel that they dreamed of, or the Israel they thought existed as a kid. And what again the genocide has shown is that that is fantasy. A liberal Zionism cannot exist in the current political paradigm and cannot exist in the future because it is only going to get more aggressive, divisive, and nationalistic. And I think for most people my age, if they have to choose, and this isn't to say that liberal nationalism doesn't exist. It does exist, it has existed, and it will exist in the future. To as someone who would call themselves a world federalist, to my dismay. But a, a liberal Zionism does not actually try to have a dialogue with itself over whether it is possible. They only have a dialogue over whether it is theoretically, presumably attemptable. And for people my age, when they have to argue between, do we have to support Israel as it exists right now and what it is doing and how, and especially how it presents itself to the world. Israel is a very whiny country. It's a very crass and aggressively uh and aggressively uncool in the sense that, it doesn't feel good to say you support Israel because Israel doesn't try to make itself look good in the grand scheme of things. And I think if you have to tell Jews my age, would you rather be associated with that? Would you rather be associated with the progressive values that you were grew up to believe that Judaism held? I think most people are going to choose that. It's only natural occurrence. You see it now. There was a recent poll that asked people, American Jews, do you support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state? And 88% of people responded and said yes, which again is asking them, do you believe that if it were ever possible, this fantasy could exist? Or ask people, do you believe in a fantasy? But then when they asked them, are you Zionists? Only around 38% of them said yes. I think you're seeing a bifurcation, and you're never going to be able to get rid of the former. People are still going to presume that it will inevitably happen, even if it's pitifully obvious it can't. But once we drill down the fact that this is what Zionism materially means, you're going to see people choose the more humane option and the more natural option.
I think many people are trying to make this kind of association that Israel is everything about for them, and that they all have like some form of dual loyalty or stuff like that. I think you're familiar with it. I just like think this is a sensitive topic for many Jews, because some have tried to put it deep in their brains that from an existential point of view there is a Jewish history, very recent Jewish history of the Holocaust and Jewish pogroms in Europe and parts of the Middle East, of course, and many Jews say, okay, so maybe I have no business to do with this state, but what would happen if something, and then we will get back to where we previously discussed. But I think many people are, I believe this is a valid fear among many people to have that, okay, what would happen, what if? But I don't think people always ask the same question when it comes to Palestinians. Okay, Palestinians, we don't have any safe state to go to. Palestinians have been experiencing a lot of discriminations in many Arab states where people assume we're all the same. We've been massacred by Assad's regime. We have been mistreated. I mean, like Saddam's regime hasn't either been always good to us. And in Kuwait, we've been 300,000 Palestinians were expelled after Saddam's invasion. And one can make a long list. Jordan, yeah, I would still say Palestinians are relatively safe in the Arab world and so, but why shouldn't Palestinians have a state where Palestinians can determine about their own future, have some form of insurance for their own rights? And this is I'm not the biggest nationalist here there, but when people always make this argument for one side from an existentialist, but then forget that other people have the same exact legitimate concerns of security. Israel is always talking about security. Palestinians don't have security. Israelis have more security than Palestinians. Palestinians don't have, definitely not freedoms. They don't have, they don't live a life in dignity. You really can't compare a life in Tel Aviv with the Gaza Strip or even the West Bank. You can't move. You can move wherever you want within Israel, even to the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, barely without even passing a single checkpoint. But if you're going to the Palestinian areas from point A to B, you need to go through an Israeli checkpoint. And people don't see this. I think many times people aren't aware of this. Frankly, I've seen many people, like there is a red sign in the West Bank, many red signs saying entrance forbidden for Israeli citizens. I think you're familiar with it. But this wasn't set up by the Palestinian Authority, for instance. It was Israel itself that is forbidding its citizens. It's especially they're focusing on the Jews. They don't want Jews to interact with Palestinians because
Yes.
many have this notion that if Jews would be more sympathetic towards the Palestinians, and that would probably be against Israel's interest to have more people seeing the perspectives of the Palestinians. Many Palestinians in the West Bank, I would say most Palestinians have negative views of Israelis. And of course, when the only Jews they meet are Israeli Jews, they will get negative exposure. That's the only like exposure they have. I think it's natural that people will see the other with contempt. So if the only Jew you've seen is a soldier who has been being on your way to your job, or been killing your family, arresting your brother, destroying your house, all this kinds of, and then even the settler terrorists and all these kind of things. And then you see people here on social media, in society, talking about Palestinian hatred of Israelis. This is UNRWA indoctrinating them, the Palestinian authorities. Actually, I don't think you need anything. I mean, the lived realities, that is what is getting people, that is what is mainly forming people's perceptions of the
Well,
other.
yeah. No, I was gonna say, I think Muhammad al-Kurd put it really perfectly when he said the Palestinians are are mandated to be perfect victims. They are mandated to go through their suffering, go through the atrocities that they experience on a weekly, if not daily basis, and not show any aggression or anger or natural emotions. And if they do, they immediately lose their victim status. Now, this isn't me to apologize for anti or to accept anti-Semitism as being something that's okay. Of course it's not. But we have to put it into the bigger picture. And we also have to see what is the more important issue here. What is the more important force on the ground? If I had to choose between having to focus on condemning a Palestinian journalist for using a Jew as a slur, as opposed to bombing an entire family and or entire apartment complex full of families, there's a bigger there's a bigger issue we have to focus on here. I mean, so many people who have gone through genocides and atrocities have grown very antagonistic opinions of their aggressors. Jews with Germans, Bosniaks and Bosnians of Serbs, uh, uh, Hutu or Tutsi with Hutu in Rwanda. But that, but that, that doesn't negate the atrocities they went through, right? The half-hearted attempt by I forget who, but to like kill 6 million Germans after the Holocaust. It was never going to happen, but there was an attempt, Nakam, by Holocaust survivors. The attempt at that doesn't mean that the Holocaust didn't happen. And we're not going to act as if their hatred, their aggression didn't have a natural root. Now, does that mean it would be okay for them to start murdering Germans left and right? Of course not. But that doesn't mean that we have to pretend that A, they are the more important aggressor in
Mm,
this story, and B, that the what they've gone through didn't actually happen because they didn't take it with the other cheek or without turning the other cheek. And
yeah.
I find the sort of I mean, this is also why there's all this focus on the Gaza Strip because you can create a plausible deniability of Hamas being this sort of uh megalomaniacal force that has control over every nook and cranny of Gaza, but you never see any focus on Hebron in the West Bank. If any Jew in the United States, in the UK, or anywhere in the diaspora just watched for an hour or even 30 minutes what it is like to be a Palestinian in Hebron, what it is like to be a non-Jew in Hebron, they would become a PLO member in a heartbeat. It is just so obviously an apartheid regime,
Mm,
and that is why you never focus on the West Bank. It's only on Gaza.
mm. Definitely. I think it wouldn't be much of a bold statement to say that many of Israel's defenders have weaponized the term anti-Semitism to shield Israel
Is
from
is is
legitimate.
the Pope Catholic? It's obvious.
Yeah, I mean, like all kind of criticisms. You can talk about how Israel was founded. Nakba. Many people think even raising Nakba. So you say you wanted to genocide the Jews in 1940. I've seen all kind of crazy statements on social media, but like if you criticize how Israel was founded, not even just saying Israel's foundation, but like how it was founded through the ethnic cleansing, destruction, everything, and also like to the point that how Israel is acting today. Israel doesn't even care much about like how it's acting. You know, from what I've seen from diplomatic sources, is that Netanyahu is trying to use so much of the leverage he has currently in American politics, because he knows that the American support for Israel will at some point run out, and he wants to maximize the output for Israel to that point. So Israel is continuing acting with no regard to Americans, because they have right now an unconditional support, but that unconditional support will not be something that will be lasting forever. How do you think like these or what are the risks and possible dangers that you conceive of these kinds of allegations that many times are very much baseless?
I mean, I think what we're seeing that now with, I mean, Instagram Reels is infested with actual serious anti-Semitism. You could see the rise of people like Nick Fuentes. That doesn't really happen without October 7th and without Israel's response to October 7th. Of course, there's anti-Semitic sort of treatment of Jews in some sorts of discourse. I mean, carving a swastika in a Jewish school or what have you. And and anti-Semitism has been increasing. But what Israel does is they essentially force people who see this as if you are a person who is not into politics, is not sort of being very theoretical about it, what Israel is trying to do to you is telling you if you are disgusted by the genocide in Gaza, do you support that and be called oppose that and be called an anti-Semite, or do you support that and not be called an anti-Semite? And most people are just going to choose the former. Not without if you force them to choose between being labeled a Jew hater and opposing genocide, they're going to choose opposing what's obviously a genocide. And also Israel it necessitates the increasing of anti-Semitism. Why? Because if anti-Semitism increases across the globe, Jews get scared, they move to Israel, it increases the population, it increases tax paying, or the amount of taxpayers, it increases, industrial output or GDP, what have you. Uh, Israel necessitates a circle of fear, a constant circle of fear to keep the Aliyah train moving. So is like the what that does, obviously, is it makes Judaism, which has existed for thousands of years before 1948, thousands of years before Jewish nationalism, Zionism was theorized. And they asked people to associate that with a state, with a border regime, with with the social construct at the UN. And they are asking you to combine those two as if Judaism necessitates the existence of a state. Did Catholicism exist before Vatican City? Yes. Could Catholicism exist if Vatican City were taken over completely by Italy? Yes. And um it's just an obvious preposterous claim to combine these two, and Israel knows it. That's why they don't try to argue it intellectually. They try to browbeat it into you. They
Mm.
try to make you they try to beat it so into you that to even think outside the box it gives you the social equivalent of a death penalty.
Yeah,
They
I
don't
think
want to have an actual intellectual claim.
yeah, I think like there is a like I mean like as you mentioned, like there is a huge risk like by watering down the term when it comes to actual incidents. Now, I don't think the big issue is when Palestinians don't like Israelis or Jews, especially if they live in the Palestinian territories where they have the negative exposure. But when we're talking about where there are large Jewish diasporas, where Jews are in minority and they're actively navigating societies that sometimes may turn more negatively against them, and there may be discrimination against them. So uh, when people are watering down, I've seen even some people are even bragging about being anti-Semites on social media now. October 7 following this has made it cool to be anti-Semitic, and I think when Israel has been much watering down the term and use it to silence or form of criticism, people have made it almost associated that, okay, if you're called anti-Semitic, it means that you're against Israel's crimes. And I think this is not only wrong, but also this is dangerous in its implication, because if you would have this position against Jews who are your neighbors. Let's say you live in, you live in United States, and if your neighbors have this view that, okay, if anti-Semitism is cool because of Israel's actions, and so they will associate you with Israel. You don't agree with what Israel is doing, but even if we would assume you would agree with what Israel is doing, would it be right to target random Jews for what Israel is doing? I think people should have the right to have despicable opinions, even if I don't agree with them at all. They shouldn't be targeted for that. But when one is normalizing a form of sentiment towards the population, it will make it increasingly more dangerous for them, and many of them will, of course, also move to Israel because feel it's too dangerous where they are, and that will be like also an engine of justification that Israel will use. You see what's happening,
Of
you
course.
know, like look at what's happening in Canada when we point at one single incident, but they will try to make this as much huger than it is. And for many people in these communities, one single incident may be enough for people to feel that's enough, because fear there will come more of this, and it may be turn more violent. And again, Jews have a history with persecutions and discrimination and everything like that. Yeah, so I mean, I think like I mean it has been very much over the decades a very useful tool for many Zionists to shield Israel from criticism, but I think it's reaching now a point where it's it's not doing the purpose, and it will rather just be used by Israel's opponents to justify attacks against its Jews, which one shouldn't agree with even again.
Of course.
Okay, so you've been many times accused of being a self-hating Jew by Zionists for your criticisms of Israel's actions. Needless to say, Drew Pavlo, but that's just the caveat.
That's another story.
How do you respond to these allegations of being self-hating Jewish person?
I mean, firstly, it's just laughable. I mean, both of my parents are Jewish. Both of their like there is almost no tree. I recently was looking at the genealogy of my family, and there is no trace of non-Jewish family members. I could go to synagogue as much as I can. I went to Jewish school up until college. I I can read Hebrew. I'm not great at speaking it, but I can read Hebrew. You know, I even have family members who were influential Israeli politicians, right? Like the idea that somehow, because of a simple belief about a border regime, about a state, that I can be called not only a bad Jew, maybe, which whatever, but a self-hating one. Someone who a self-hating Jew wouldn't go to synagogue every other week. A self-hating Jew wouldn't wouldn't be trying to do Shabbos dinners, etc. It's just obviously a ludicrous claim. And then there's also just the fact that it is, again, it's the worst thing you could be too many, and this is not just Zionism, this is almost all forms of nationalism. The worst thing you can be is an apostate, is Prometheus giving fire to humans, even though God didn't God or Zeus told him not to, right? It's the idea that you can't be a traitor, and they view not sticking to the simple Hasbara regime of moral army in the world, greatest state on earth, only democracy, and wherever. If you don't stick to that agenda, then you are nothing better than a capo, right? It's I mean it's so obviously uh antagonist, not even just antagonistic, but so nakedly uh just only based on pure petty resentment. But I think like the other third thing I would say to being called a self-hating Jew is that I think actually they're the self-hating Jews. If anything, I think that I think that by, you know, s- so trying to marry like a religion with a deep, with a deep, complex history and putting it into a simple state that's existed for less than the transistor chip. But, to act as if that is what defines Judaism. And also you see so much of that, like you will never see a more anti-Semitic ad than an ad in Israel against Orthodox Jews. There is so much attacks on Orthodox Jews within Israel, which I have never, treated them as moochers or as, like welfare queens. But yet if you want to say that, go ahead. Just don't call me the self-hating Jew.
Mhm. I think like that stems from a like sense of insecurity, among many people. They
Of
feel
course.
like if people are dissenting from a main narrative, you're being a threat to the greater parts of the people. So, in attempt to prevent further dissent. They try to stigmatize certain people, try to make an example of some people. Look, this person is a capo, he's a safe-hating Jew. I think I think this is one thing I'm getting like on the top of my head when discussing when I get the accusations. I've seen sometimes valid cases of self-hating, but I mean, I personally definitely not agree on you. But like this would be like basically if someone would say, "I want Hamas to kill me, or to bomb my family." I would make this argument here or there, but I mean, the term self-hating is often just a weapon in discourse to silence people. I think besides the conflict with the Palestinians, there is an internal conflict between the Israeli Jews, which hasn't been much spelled because one is larger than the other. And one of the reasons many of these liberal Zionists in Tel Aviv has been very indifferent to the settlers in the West Bank is because they also despise them, and they want them to move to Israel proper, because they see these people as problematic, and they rather have these problematic people among the Palestinians, among their enemies, doing whatever problems they're doing with Palestinians rather than with them. So this is just like how I view it. I don't know either how this looks in the Jewish diaspora. If there is the same kind of conflict between secular and religious Jews.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the re I think that a good part of the reason why the attacks by settlers in the West Bank have been under discussed in Israel is partially because there is a greater uh blackout of information about the genocide in Israel. There's a great article in 972 about this if you want to read up more about it. But there is also just the fact that they don't believe that the settlers are actually part of the community. They're not part of Israel. They're the bad ones. You also see this in Zionists in the United States. mocking or attacking people like Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich as being, everyone agrees that they're terrible. That, but, like saying that they can't define Israel as if they don't have more power than the people that they support within Israel. There's a treatment of these interests as being alien to Israel because they might not have been in power 30 or 40 years ago. And then the other big conflict, of course, is as you said, Arab or Jews from Arab origin or from Arabic countries versus Ashkenazi Jews. And a lot of these Jews from places of Mizrahim, I'll call them, there's a lot of resentment there, which goes into why people like Bibi and Netanyahu have been so successful because they harness that resentment, they harness that anger. Um, and I think that you're also are starting to see uh, a major break between American Jews and Israeli Jews, right? That there is going to be a point where American Jews cannot associate with the people that they feel are so unconnected to them, and also like so acting as if they are imperious, acting so imperious over Jewish identity that there is going to be a break. And the question is not if it will happen, but when.
Mm. I think this is quite interesting what you mentioned here because um, I think often religious and ethnic groups usually stand with each other. There is like some form of like psychological factor here. I mean, Arabs would like to stay with Arabs even if they're not from the same Arab country. Palestinians would stand with Lebanese because like we can identify with them. Like even Pakistani Muslims can stand with Azerbaijan against Armenia, which has happened, and they refuse to recognize Armenia even as a state, despite Armenia and Azerbaijan not having any beef anything before. So I think like there is a similar like the same group Jews in the United States sympathize with Israelis because they share a form of identity, but this identity is
Yes.
also um, has also, I would assume, been in conflict many times because, as you mentioned, American Jews are more uh, democratic, liberal compared to Israeli Jews who are much less sympathetic to these values. But still, there is a sympathy because when you see someone like you, when you have someone sharing some of your history, many of the Holocaust survivors went to the United States and so many went to Israel. So there is much shared history, much shared connections. Many American Jews moved to Israel and vice versa. Um, so I think there are bonds between the communities. Then one can talk about if these bonds will weaken or if they are already weakening. I think they are going to weaken in the coming years, at least in the among the younger generations. What's your predictions?
I mean, we can see this with the recent New York City mayoral election. Andrew Cuomo, I think, won with American Jews, as was expected, but Mamdani won about 30 something percent, even with this massive hate campaign towards him, specifically calling him an anti-Semite. This sort of massive attempt at a Jewish solidarity movement out of paranoia and fear, and it didn't work. Um, I think that is the first chip in the that is the first chip at the glass door that will inevitably have to break. Now, of course, there is a sense of solidarity between American Jews and Israeli Jews. You saw it after October 7th, a massive outpouring of grief, a massive outpouring of support, a massive outpouring of solidarity. Um, but again, that is not a grief or that is not a solidarity that can be eternal. There will always be a sense of connection and a sense of homeness. But Jews, but but Israeli Jewish politicians, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, has realized that um, if he just tries to associate with one political party, well, other Israeli, the Republican Party, because they'll hand him victories more so than the Democratic Party, that he could just do whatever he wants if he just tries to stick his guns to to a certain side. And again, most American Jews are liberal, are members of the Democratic Party. I think that will decrease in the coming years as Jews become more assimilated. But Israel has tried very hard to ask Jews, you either go our way or your own way. And it's even not just in terms of Palestine, it's in terms of just representation of Judaism on the world stage. And again, there comes a time when things will have to break. I think the question is just
Mm.
when, not if.
This is well formulated final words for this episode. Before we wrap up this episode, I would also add, where can our audience follow you and your work?
If you know who I am, you probably know me through the app formerly known as Twitter, X, at Sojagoy Teller. So you could just look up my own name.
Mm.
I
And also
have
link it.
I post there. Yes, I post there quite often. You can see a lot of my work. That you can also follow my Substack. Just look up Sami Gold Substack. You'll find it there. You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on um you can find me on all of these apps. If you seek to see my work, I've been published in the article of and I published an article in Liberal Currents, and on my Substack I've published an article about Israel before. So if you want to find my work, you can find me all over there.
Mm. Sammy, I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for taking the time
Thank you.
to join us on the
Hmm.
podcast.
Of course. Yes. Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Goodbye.